Hi guys, this is Jan for Chess24. Round 8 in the FIDE Grand Prix, and the most spectacular game of the round was the inner Russian battle between Alexander Grischuk and Sergey Karjakin. Karjakin doing very well in the tournament on 4.5 out of 7, only half a point behind the leader Fabiano Caruana, while Alexander Grischuk has not been doing so well on 3 out of 7, but he is always dangerous with the white pieces. Very short time ago he crossed the 2800 barrier, has had a bit of a setback since, but let's see how he fares against Sergey Karjakin in this round 8 game. Grischuk goes 1d4, Karjakin knight f6, no surprises there, c4, e6, that's what Karjakin does. And 3 knight f3, seems like the Nimzo is really out of fashion. We don't see any guy going 3 knight c3. 3 knight f3, Karjakin been one of the main fans of the Queen's India and the move b6 here for many years. Question that was discussed recently, why does no one play the Queen's Indian anymore? I'm not sure. My theory is that white just has too many options in these sharp lines after g3, bishop a6, but we will see it again. It is a sound opening. By Karjakin today, he goes for d5, so far so good. Knight c3, this is the tabia they are discussing all the time, with black choosing one of many moves. Bishop e7, bishop b4, c5, c6, dc4. And today we see the move c6, the semi-Slav. My old weapon, which Karjakin also used to play a lot, but quite a while ago. We haven't seen it from him. Well, I haven't seen it in his latest games. Grischuk used to be, or still is, he's always one of the sharpest theoreticians, and he doesn't shy away from a principal discussion here. He was at the forefront of this anti-Moscow gambit, which we're going to see in the game. h6 and bishop h4. Not going for the quiet bishop f6, queen f6, e3. With White has given up the 2 bishops, but he has a center, a bit of a lead in development. And recent discussions have mainly taken place here, with sometimes white achieving a little something, sometimes not. That's not Grischuk's style. He's very principled, goes for the maximum, bishop h4. And this makes it a real pawn sacrifice after d takes c4, e4. Black could transpose into the Botvinnik here with b5, but he does have an extra option, which really makes the character of this line special, this anti-Moscow gambit. He goes g5, bishop g3, b5, and now there's no forced line like in the Botvinnik. I'm sure I'm confusing everybody, but I hope you guys can follow. Like in the Botvinnik, where after b5, e5, g5, white wins his pawn back and the play becomes very forced. The anti-Moscow is a real pawn sacrifice. There's no way for white to get his pawn back anytime soon. He just hopes that black, being a bit overextended on both flanks and him controlling the center, will provide enough counterplay or enough compensation to sooner or later attack the black king, which doesn't have a safe hiding spot anywhere on the board. Many years of my youth were spent analyzing this position. The problem is it's very irrational. So you can analyze a lot with a computer and you get some conclusions, but it's very hard to understand underlying principles or to play it on understanding. At least for me it is. Bishop e2, bishop b7. This is all well-known stuff. White has a lot of options here. h4, one of them. Let's change the color. h4, g4, knight e5. Lot of theory battles here after rook g8, for example. The immediate knight e5 has some subtleties, some venom. The quiet castles has been played a lot. Knight b7, knight e5, and so on and so forth. All happy memories of the past. All these lines are still complicated. None of them have been refuted for black, but recently white has more and more been pursuing a different direction here. The very direct move e5. Which I always thought looks a bit silly. You're blocking in your own bishop, you're giving the black knight this beautiful square on d5. But white, even here, has very good compensation. He gets access to this e4 square, he gains some more space, and he chases another black piece away from the king side. So if he ever manages to open the position here, it could get quite serious. Short castles, they used to play h4, but that didn't really lead anywhere. Bishop b4 is possible, and g4 is also possible. So short castles is the modern way to play it. And here is where Karjakin deviates from the trodden path. Knight d7 has been the main line here for most of the 2000s. When, well, one of my prouder moments was winning this position as black after knight d2, queen b6 against Hikaru Nakamura, even though it was mainly due to good preparation. But this is one of the sharper lines, and recently white has also tried some other things like a4, a6 and knight takes d5. Looks ridiculous, straightening out the black pawn structure, but after knight e1, once again it is felt that his pawn is on g5, where it will provide a target for white's f4, and also it gives up this square for the bishop. So here white actually gets a very serious initiative for his pawn, and it could very well be that this was a line Karjakin didn't want to face. So he goes knight takes c3. Has been seen, but not in many games. B takes c and c5, that's the idea, immediately trying to free this bishop. Conventional wisdom used to say, you can't do this, your queen side is too loose, something's gonna drop. But with the help of these powerful computers nowadays, you probably can make it work, and Sergey Karjakin is always well prepared, so I have no doubt he knew this was playable. a4, a6 is actually now transposed to a game played by me a long time ago against Stellan Brunel, a Swedish Grandmaster. I was black, and Brunel went a takes b, rook takes, bishop takes, queen b1 here. I remember I felt terrible during the game because, yeah, his pieces are all active and mine aren't. But turns out I was doing alright, and after bishop c6, rook d1, played the weird move queen c8, after which I had to suffer a bit. But after knight d7 here, black is not really in that much trouble. d5, and it continues forever, it's very complicated, but black seemed to survive. So Grischuk deviates from that, plays another interesting move, probably a stronger move, keeping the tension, the immediate queen b1, attacking this pawn, and also making way for the rook to go to d1. And yeah, black can't keep his pawns together with simple means. Queen d7, rook d1 just looks terrible, neglecting development too much. So he has to kind of do something immediate. Well, not immediate, but he has to spice the position up even further. And that's what Karjakin does. He goes g4. The other option there was the move h5, planning to go h4, also leading to more craziness. But Karjakin goes g4, trying to chase this knight away from the center, and then taking on d4, setting the board on fire. Of course, g4 doesn't do any favors to the potential black king safety on the king side. But what are you gonna do? Knight h4 is the best square for the knight. C takes d, that was the idea. And this is a very weird position. I'm not gonna pretend that I analyzed it seriously or that I have any idea what's going on. White can capture 4 black pawns, and all of these moves are quite interesting. AB, bishop c4, bishop g4, cd4, all have to be taken into consideration. And I'm not sure what's best. Actually, the computer says this is best, and I don't really have a reason to doubt him. Bishop takes c4. Might not be the first pawn you think of capturing, but after b takes c, queen b7, it turns out that white comes out on top. And it's not so easy for black to play this position. D takes c3, a takes b5, also looks insanely dangerous. Queen c8 is the move the computer gives when the weirdness continues. That's the problem with these semi-Slav variations. The positions are so rational that they're very hard to play on understanding. You either have to know things or you have to be really, really good at calculating and at evaluating where am I getting mated, where am I not getting mated. And white has the advantage. He's normally not getting mated. His king is quite safe, but if things do go wrong for him, he can find himself a couple pawns down or the black pieces steamroll him. So, tricky situation. Grischuk played the more human move a takes b5, also trying to open the queen side, but that at least gives black a chance to consolidate part of his structure by going d3, safeguarding these 2 pawns and creating a very powerful passed pawn on d3 for the future. Should black ever make into an ending, he's gonna be in good shape. Bishop takes g4, restoring material equality. a5, maybe not forced, but very logical, trying to keep the queen side closed and then proceeding to develop the pieces if possible. Grischuk now immediately exchanges the only black piece that already is developed, the bishop on b7, goes bishop f3, bishop takes, knight f3, queen to d5. That's the plus of having these bishop exchange. The queen gets a nice outpost on d5. Once again, black has a kind of clear plan now to continuous development. Knight d7, bishop somewhere, short castles, and all the pieces are active, plus you have this trump on d3. So white has to do something, and what Grischuk decides is to attack these pawns as soon as he can. Rook a4, knight d7, queen a2, knight to b6, rook takes a5, netting him an extra pawn. If my count is correct, my pawn count has been off all day. Rook takes, queen takes, but now black manages to more or less finish development. Bishop c5, castles next, and thanks to this very powerful pawn on d3, I believe black is alright here. The pawn count is less important than the quality, and these pawns are much stronger than, for example, these pawns. So the opening, I'm not sure if it was a success for Karjakin, but he did certainly survive the first wave of the attack and should be in decent shape here. Grischuk shows with his move queen a2 what a strong player he is. He realizes his queen has nothing more to do on a5, and he immediately tries to bring it over to the king side where the black king will set up shop. Castles, queen to d2, attacking h6, king h7 makes a lot of sense, and rook to e1. There were alternatives, but this also makes a lot of sense, just, well, overprotecting this e5 pawn, and in the future hoping that maybe there will be a good opportunity for a rook lift to the king side. Bishop e7, this move confuses me a little bit. It feels like this bishop had a more natural home on f8 if you're ever going to retreat it, to cover h6 and then to attack this pawn. Bishop e7 feels like a little bit of a half measure. It's not a bad move, but I'm not sure if starting with rook g8 was more accurate. Bishop f4, this makes a lot of sense, attacking the pawn on h6, and black has the clever Zwischenzug rook g8, threatening queen takes f3, so white is not in time to take here because this would be painful. Said he has to spend the tempo on king h1, leaving this open g-file, and now black is in time to go bishop f8. As I mentioned, maybe could have gone there in one go, but I still think black is okay here. Queen takes b5 is a threat, and knight to d4 here or later does defend the pawn, but it does not strike me as such a good option. The knight somehow isn't doing very much. It's always vulnerable to bishop c5 and also to ideas like knight to a4. Oh my god, that blunder mate in one. I felt like something's wrong here. Speak about this position after knight d4 for like 5 minutes, and yeah, queen takes g2, checkmate. That's why it doesn't strike me as such a good option. It's late, ladies and gentlemen. One day we're gonna try to do videos where I don't allow mate in one move. So don't move that knight, hard to defend the pawn, and Grischuk sets off on a new regrouping. He goes bishop e3, attacking the knight, and more importantly, he wants to put this bishop to d4 and his queen to f4, once again attacking vulnerable spots in the black camp. Queen takes b5 was probably possible here, but then after bishop b6, queen b6, queen to f4 might have bothered Karjakin with a double attack against f7 and c4, even though here after queen c7, black manages to defend both and is still very much in the game. Still, he played knight d7, also nothing wrong with that. His pawn isn't really going away, and it's not a priority for Grischuk. His priority is to not give up the initiative on the king side. So he goes bishop d4, queen takes b5, Karjakin got his pawn, and queen f4, attacking f7. And here is where things get confusing. Karjakin decides not to defend the pawn with rook g7, which admittedly looks a bit clumsy, but there seems to be no direct argument against going for this, and it seems like black is still in pretty decent shape here. Instead, Karjakin gives up the pawn with bishop g7, and now after queen takes f7, white has some new chances. It's not so much the pawn, but The queen also, gets close to the black king. There's some new targets, the f6 square, the e6 pawn. Black is now distracted by having to defend this pawn on e6, goes queen d5, and the position got a lot more dangerous. Still, the pawn on d3 is still alive, so it ain't over at all. Queen d5, rook a1 is the move indicated here by the computer, intending to go rook a7, and it looks like black would have a hard time defending this. Rook f8, queen h5, rook f5 looks logical, activating all the pieces, queen g4, and white still keeps the upper hand here because the black king just is very, very weak. Now knight h4, for example, is in the air. I'm sorry. Grischuk didn't go for that. He went for another logical move, knight d2, playing knight e4 and knight f6 if possible. Also knight takes c4 in some lines, since this guy would be hanging. Rook f8, queen e7, staying as close as possible to the enemy pieces and the targets in the black camp. And rook to f5 looks very logical as well. However, there was a better option, one of my favorite moves, but very easy to miss, so very hard to spot in this situation. The retreat knight d7 to b8, putting this knight to c6, where it does very good work, attacking the bishop on d4, and it would attack the queen and still attack the e5 pawn. Would have kept black very much in the game. It seems like white has nothing better than to retreat. Bishop e3, knight c6, queen h4, knight takes e5, and the battle keeps going with their completely unclear outcome. Queen e7, rook f5, rook e3, intending rook to g3, and here is where Karjakin misses the star line of the game. This would have been very spectacular. As we said, both players were in serious time trouble by now. That's what this Moscow gambit, these semi-Slav positions do to you. You spend so much time calculating extremely complicated lines that you always run out of time near the end of the game, or near the time control. Knight takes e5. This is the move he should have played. I'm sure this was not the move he missed, but he saw that white wants to go rook g3, threatening. Queen g7 checkmate, and after rook f7, this looks like the defense. White has the resource. Queen takes f7 check, which looks lethal. Knight takes f7, rook takes g8, king h8, rook takes f7 check. So far so good. You probably continue calculating here. You see the move e5 with a double attack against these two pieces, but then you see the move rook to f5, pitting this pawn, and probably you quit your calculations. White has three pieces for the queen. He's going to pick up e5 and just get a winning position. But turns out black is winning in this position after the very cute e takes d4, rook takes d5, d takes c3, and the three black pawns are stronger than the white rook and knight and can't be stopped. Knight takes c4, c2. This pawn just queens. Try for yourself. There's nothing white can do here. So this would have been a very nice variation. White wouldn't have been forced to go for it, and probably he would have realized somewhere along the way, around here, that you can't go for it. And after bishop f6, it seems like white still has a draw. For example, queen f5, rook g6, king h7, rook g7 with perpetual. But that would have been a very pretty way to end the game. Didn't happen. Karjakin went rook g5, which threatens queen g2 checkmate. As we've seen earlier in this video, that threat is easily missed, but Grischuk does manage to parry it with rook to g3. Knight takes e5 now. Rook takes g5. Actually, this could have transposed, so there was no much harm by going knight e5 first, because after rook g3 you can still go rook g5 and transpose to this, and you have the extra option rook f7. Still didn't happen. Rook g3, knight takes e5, rook g5, hg5, and here it's very, very easy, having analyzed this game with a computer, to suggest these idiots, why don't they play h4? That's an obvious move. And after gh you go knight f3, and you have a very good position, because queen d7 now runs into queen h4 check. But over the board, such lines or such positions are so hard to calculate with little time, and Grischuk plays a move that looks extremely strong. And in time trouble, if you see this move, you don't think twice, you just go for it. He goes knight takes c4. Point being that knight takes c4 does not really work because of queen g7 checkmate. and queen c4 is not much better because of bishop e5, followed by queen g7 checkmate. So after knight c4, black has to do something. Bishop e5 is a threat, d2 doesn't help, just knight d2. And he goes for king g6. His position looks ridiculous, but the pawn on d3 is still alive, and it turns out that objectively black is actually okay here, believe it or not. This pawn provides enough counterplay. After knight e3, for example, just d2 is always enough to keep black in the game, threatening queen b3, and there is not that much that white can do. Instead, Grischuk plays a more testing move, also an easy move to make in time trouble. He goes queen e8 check, and surprisingly this move yields immediate results, because here Karjakin cracks under the pressure, goes knight to f7, which loses the game. Said he had to go king h6, and once again, black is doing alright, believe it or not. The logical line would be knight e3, d2, h3, queen b3. This pawn will cost white a piece, however white has enough compensation for that piece. After king h2, queen takes, queen takes e6 check. White has 3 pawns, knight g6, and the game should end in a draw. So that would have been another logical conclusion after, the mutual mistakes in time trouble, which are very hard to avoid in such a position. But knight f7 pretty much ends the game abruptly, because now there are too many pins. This knight is pinned already, but the queen finds a more useful job to do, pin the bishop. It's only one move to avoid immediate disaster with queen g7, that's e5. Now that opens black up to a new pin, and after knight takes e5, both black minor pieces are pinned, neither can take on e5 for pretty obvious reasons. So black loses the house after what next move, knight takes f7, and had to resign here. Strange game. It's what happens in these semi-Slav battles. The positions are so irrational often, like here this position after g4, knight h4, cd4. To calculate this alone, you could spend all your time. Do I go bishop c4, bishop g4, cd, ab, rook d1? It's so complicated. Knight g6. That, at the end it becomes a bit of a coin flip. Who has the better nerves and the better calculating skills in time trouble? And of course it's hard to bet against Alexander Grischuk there. Also, white does have the practical advantage that normally his king is safer than the black king, and especially in these super complicated situations, that tends to help. Anyway, good win for Alexander Grischuk, who, did not have a great tournament, but let's still have a look at the standings, see how they changed. This was a dramatic round. The leader, Fabiano Caruana, lost and was caught by Lenier Dominguez and Hikaru Nakamura. Sergey Karjakin, who was very much in pursuit, is still only half a point behind, but his chances to qualify for the candidates tournament with his loss have become very slim. Now it looks like Caruana and Nakamura are in the driver's seat for the 2 spots for the candidates. Alexander Grischuk, still is not going to be happy with this tournament, but if things go his way a bit, he's only 1 point behind the leaders on 50%. Anything can still happen. That was my game of the day. I'm not going to pretend I understood what really happened in the game. That was a tough one. Thank you guys for watching this video. Subscribe to the Chess24 YouTube channel. Like us on wherever we are, Facebook, YouTube. Follow me on Twitter, GM Jan Gustafsson. Become a Chess24 premium member. Send me whatever, money, opening analysis, whatever comes to your mind. I'm done, I'm tired. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.